Good morning. Welcome to another panel. Great morning already. I mean, very interesting insights that we talked about earlier. And I'm just going to do a real quick intro to my right, to my left. Dr. Gabrielle Bedewi, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay, so I'm Gabrielle Bedewi, and when I get introduced as Dr. Bedewi, I feel like I have to explain. I'm not a physician. I'm actually a statistician with a personality. And the closest I can diagnose somebody's condition is to give them their survival rate, which decreases very quickly the longer they talk to me and not a real physician. So I do, my background, I have a PhD in statistics and management sciences, and I love to work with data and making sense of it and finding those nuggets of insights, especially with segmentation, understanding customer journey, and also predictive modeling. So that's my area of focus.
Yeah, and I think when we met before this, right, you were talking about that you do a lot of international travel, you do a lot of work with not-for-profits and with interests in women's and children's issues, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my other passion.
Yeah. So, Brian, you're the CMO over at LifeBridge. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good morning.
It's on.
There we go. Okay, good. So CMO of LifeBridge Health, we're a 5-system health provider in the Baltimore, Maryland area. We have dozens of other kind of ancillary facilities, minute clinics, that kind of thing. I am relatively new to the healthcare space. Most of my background has been in retail, B2C marketing with Target, Capital One, for generally pretty big players in the space. So this is relatively, healthcare is relatively new to me, but it's very interesting because as a marketer, if you want to do something that impacts people's lives, you can sell them credit cards, you can sell them automobiles, but there's really no more impactful experience a person will have than when they're dealing with healthcare for themselves or their families. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be in this industry, and it's great to meet everybody.
Cool. Thanks. And in talking to Brian before this, I learned that he's an amateur race car driver, which is, I think, very, very cool.
A very bad one, so I crashed on.
Well, at least you're crashing on the track, right, or into the cones, right?
Yeah, I don't need my own services, so
yeah,
that's good.
That's good. Justin, you're the EVP and Managing Director at CMI Compas. Compas, you want to tell us a little bit? And you guys got some good shout-outs this morning.
We did.
Already?
We did. Thank you, Ted, from before. Absolutely. So Justin Freid from CMI Compas. We are a media strategy and buying agency as part of WPP Health and Wellness. I've been in the pharmaceutical space for about the last 6 years. And before that, I actually did a lot with health systems and actually health insurance. So I've kind of been in the health sector for quite some time. I'm looking forward to bringing you guys some insights today.
Cool. And Justin is a competitive barbecuer, and he has his own sort of style of barbecue, right? Which is
absolutely. So if you can't tell by my size, I got into barbecuing because I really like to eat barbecue, and figured I could make it better than some of the places I was getting it from. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Shonel is Associate Director of Media down at AstraZeneca. You want to tell us a little bit about?
Sure. Shonel Morrison, Associate Media Director from EZ, which is a biopharmaceutical company, both in the primary care space, also specialty care. I sit within a group within the organization that is made up of subject matter experts, everything from social media to media strategy, content strategy, and really partnering with brand teams and marketers, as well as other centralized groups in the regulatory space to help develop strategies and everything from strategy to execution, helping brands get their campaigns into market.
Cool, thank you. I think one of the most interesting things about our panel is that a number of us came from outside healthcare, and so hopefully we're going to bring you some insights of what we did when we were outside of healthcare and maybe either less regulated industries or industries where we could be more creative or were more advanced in their use of data. And then, Shonel was on the agency side for quite a long time and has made the leap to the client side now. So I'll be interested to hear your perspectives on how you experience this differently on both sides. As a marketer myself, I mean, I got into digital marketing, founded my agency in 1999. I've been at this for quite a long time. We come at it from the software development side, and so when we're thinking about these problems, quite literally, we're trying to figure out how to apply software to the data in order to change people's lives, right? So how do we create life-changing experiences for people all the time? And what's interesting about that is, there's a number of challenges we face. One of the things that struck me, I was preparing for this panel, was a couple of years, I go to a lot of conferences, right? I'm fortunate in that. And I remember a couple of years ago, we spent almost all of our time on stage talking about all the things we couldn't do yet, right? Well, MLR won't let us do this, PAC won't let us do that, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like, to some degree, on the data stuff and on the personalization stuff and creating these sort of custom experiences for people, we're at that stage again. We're past that now on the digital side. I go to the conferences, we don't talk about all the stuff we can't do now. We've pretty much nailed that and talking about the things we can do. I think here we're running into, privacy issues, siloing issues, data, sort of aggregation and, anonymization issues. So, given that, and do you agree with that, or do you not agree with that idea? I mean, do you see that there's a lot of resistance to personalization, and what can we do to sort of overcome that resistance?
So I think one of the things I've personally noticed over the past couple of years in the pharma space is we've gotten over a big hump. So again, as I mentioned before, I've been here about 6 years. When I started in the pharmaceutical space, there was definitely a lot of pushback. But I think just for reasons that a lot of clients have developed, some of the stuff like that Shonel's team is on at AZ, and when we got to work with her, there are people internally at these larger companies now that understand marketing, understand what data is utilized, and it's great to have an internal advocate to work across inside to speak to regulatory to get us over those humps. And so I can tell you now, I mean, most of the pharmaceutical companies and some of just the general health companies we work with now are over that hump. And are definitely, now we have to be careful. It's not one-to-one, Justin Freid takes Nexium every single day. Sorry, I'm leaving you guys too much information here.
It's the barbecue.
Yeah, it's the barbecue. It's not that far, right? But it is a personalized message based on my behaviors, based on insights of my browsing history and who I am and what credit card information I have and what luxury brands I like or don't like. So we're definitely taking that next step now.
Yeah, and I also think, as being one of those internal advocates, it's also working with, the regulatory partners, the people that are champions and are advocates for what you're trying to do, and trying to get them on your side and work on the other folks later, right? Trying to get them to come around eventually. But I do also think that there's been a change in the way that marketers think about who their customers are, and even patients understanding that there's more than just a patient journey, right? There's more than just when a patient gets diagnosed to when they're on a treatment. But also that they're browsing the web. There are other things that they're doing in their journey in terms of researching their condition. And so they're more than just a patient. They're just like every one of us. I do think that having that internal advocate to get over that hump and try to change internal thinking has definitely contributed to a shift in terms of healthcare and personalization and getting smarter with the way that we advertise.
So I started my career in banking and moved on to automotive, retail, et cetera. And if you think about the changes that are going on and how the business was for banking, a lot of it is business to consumer. A lot of the decisions that the member or customer is making is their own choice. In healthcare, it's been a lot of it business to business with commercial types of plans. The relationship building, sales driven, and it's only when the member was the one starting to make that choice with individual plans, with essential plans, Medicare plans, that necessitated the way we communicate with members has to be by knowing what their needs are, what their preferences are, and turning from sales to marketing. So that's what made healthcare, the industry is a little laggard industry, but they're there now, and they see the importance of looking at that member journey, understanding the member's needs, connecting with them, not just from a marketing perspective, but also case management, customer center, trying to integrate all that information so that when they are communicating with them, when they're reaching them, when they're developing new products, they're truly understanding that members' needs. So that's why you're seeing that dependency on data and integrating data. Changing culture is still there, having to think more from a membership perspective, Member 360. A lot of the insurance companies are getting there. They're building their data hubs. They're integrating that information and then feeding marketing too, and changing from sales mentality to a marketing mentality.
So in my experience, LifeBridge Health is a multi-billion-dollar provider. And through that provider lens, they deal with the customer experience as it presents itself. So somebody walking into an ER and presenting with shortness of breath, that's how they look at the patient. So pulling somebody from the outside like myself, I find that there's a lot of interest in understanding what the customer journey is, but that's about where the level of knowledge stops. So they're looking to understand that customer journey, preceding the visit to the ER, after the treatment, post-treatment, and ongoing care, but they don't necessarily know what that means or how to activate it or how to stand up that structure. So that they know that they're lagging and deficient in certain areas, but they don't quite know what that means. They don't know how a customer record on Salesforce or Eloqua or something like that would integrate with an electronic medical record, and they don't understand how to weave that all together. And then what does a customer journey actually look like? Where it is prior, it's been the patient presents, they heal the patient, they send them on their way, and then maybe they'll see a billboard 6 months from now. What we're trying to move to is a customer journey that really never ends, where it has certain ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, but that we start developing a real relationship with that customer where they grow to trust us. And to the earlier presenter, they trust our quality, but they also trust the experience, and we can repeat that experience, and we can inform that experience and get deeper, have a deeper relationship with that patient through an ongoing life cycle. And that holistic view is something that, at least from a provider standpoint, organizations like mine, which aren't terribly huge, but they're big enough, I think we're just starting to cross that threshold.
Thank you. So, and to that point, right? So CRM and other platforms that we're building on now sort of promises 360-degree view of customers, of HCPs, of patients. What do you guys see, as the real-world challenges associated with aggregating that data and making it useful? And then the follow-up is going to be, what are some things that we can do about it, in the next year or two, right, to start to reduce those challenges and make the data more useful?
I don't want to go first.
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
No, I'll just speak to, I think, some of the challenges that we face internally at AZ, and a lot of it has to do with inconsistent capture of data. I think we all want to get to exactly what you were speaking about, but inconsistent capture, also having systems that are at our disposal, but there's a lack of awareness from the marketers that those systems actually exist. So, the folks that are actually going out and purchasing the different technology that could store customer records aren't actually speaking to marketers to understand how do we kind of connect that gap. So I think inconsistent capture of data, and then also lack of awareness internally that those systems actually exist and can aid marketers in developing their campaigns, I think is one of the hurdles and challenges that we face.
I was going to actually take it a step back before we get into CRM, right? And we talk about, when we're going into, hey, who is our patient segmentation? What are their attitudes? When we go into our media mix modeling phase to understand how we're going to target them. One of the biggest things that I find the biggest issue is we come up with these great attitudinal patient segments, right? The hero, the good citizen, and it's all this information about who this person is and what they think, but none of it is actionable from a media targeting perspective. And I can't go and take, okay, let me drop this into one of my tools and automatically get those individuals' profiles online, right? It doesn't work like that, and especially in the healthcare space where we have to be, careful with any kind of HIPAA compliance. So I think that's key here. So one of the things that we've started to do is if we at CMI do patient segmentation and HCP segmentation, but if we happen to not be doing that for a client, getting involved earlier on in the process with whoever it is, if it's an internal team, a different agency, and making sure that media is a big part of that. Because at the end of the day, it's great to know these groups of people and who they are and what they think, but if we can't do anything to them, we can't target them, we can't reach them, we can't talk to them with a specific message, is it really useful? So that's one of the biggest, I think, especially in the pharmaceutical space, where there's a large gap right now.
You know, and that's an interesting point. So, and we run into that all the time where I work. And one of the things that we've done is we're now starting to do latent semantic analysis on the verbatim search queries, and then trying to align the lexical variants, the way people talk about things, with those attitudinal profiles, and then build content based on the specific semantic structures that they use, the specific language they use, and then field that content. It means we have to build a lot more content.
Absolutely.
And it's a little bit thinner. And what's interesting about that is that we may build, you know, historically we would build like one FAQ page, right? We would pick the prototypical way to ask that question, and then we'd run that one through, and we'd hope that would resonate with everybody. Now we'll build, you know, 5 or 10 versions of that same FAQ page, each one with the question phrased how that particular demographic asked that question, and then the answer is formed in a way that they would, the language that they would use to answer it. And what happens is with, say, you know, RankBrain and some of the more advanced targeting algorithms from Google, we actually see different content being placed in front of different audiences for the same search. And it converts at a much higher rate. And so that's sort of one of the ways that we're approaching that particular issue. And, you know, we use lots of AI and ML, machine learning, in order to process that much data.
Absolutely, and I think to your point before of like what's going on outside of healthcare and what could we be doing better, 2 data sources. One, you mentioned search. Search queries give you an inordinate amount of data and information, not just, you know, what you're getting from Google's keyword planner, but also what you're getting from internal search on your website and other places as well. So I think there's a lot more data there. The other part, social listening. There is a ridiculous amount of people talking way too openly about, you know, their health on social media, but it really gives you insight into what questions those individuals have that are going unanswered from your brand.com or your FAQ page. That is a gold mine, something that we've really started to use to match up with those patient segments to potentially help us with targeting from a contextual perspective.
From our perspective, our challenges are a little bit different in that a lot of what you referenced earlier, which is what we're dealing with, which is silos, data accuracy, those kinds of things. So what we've done is my counterparts in in patient experience, we'll call it, IT, and myself have endeavored to really identify who owns what. We have some IT that's proprietary in terms of the software technology, and we've assigned owners and we've assigned the metrics that in the short run we want to establish a dashboard. We want to understand who owns what, get on the same page, understand where our investments are for 18, 36 months out, and then how this is going to be in service of our communication objectives as well as our patient experience objectives. Prior to my arrival and the arrival of some others, that wasn't happening. Everybody was operating against their own objectives within their own silos, taking direction from the same group of senior executives, but there was no coherent strategy. So what we've really tried to do is pull the IT experts together, pull the patient experience experts together, marketing experts, and understand, based on the objectives that we've been given, what are we going to do? What is our consensed plan? What are our metrics that we're going to measure, that we're going to goal ourselves by? And then try and stand up that structure and realign resources to go make some of that happen. But again, from a provider perspective, I don't see a lot of that from my peers. And I think the hospitals and the doctors and the providers that I talk to, a lot of that structure is what's lacking, and that coordination is what's lacking. And I see that as probably our nearest and dearest next step.
So one of the things that anybody who engages with me knows now what my first question is whenever I try and develop a segmentation or predictive model or any types of insights is I start by asking, what is the objective of the insight you want me to give you? How are you going to act on it? Because there are different approaches, even segmentation. There's attitudinal-based segmentation, primary research. You can understand the why people behave certain ways, the different segments, but you can't assign a person to a segment on your database. But it has a lot of value from the insights you get. You have behavioral segmentation that helps you through the activities, the transactions, the patterns, the behavior. You can put people in different segments depending on their response to campaigns, etc. But again, sometimes you don't understand the why. You also have syndicated segmentation systems out there, like the Prism, Personix, Mosaic. Different providers provide you different ones. And those are great because they give you an indication for a linkage to other data sources that tell you the why and external behavior to your own customer base. So it gives you information about the market, about the prospect, about the growth of those segments. And the question is, how do you integrate all of those together? And there are ways of doing that. And a lot of times the syndicated segmentation is the link between your attitudinal and your behavioral. Now, one of the other things I like to do is I like to have everybody at an enterprise level see themselves and see the value of the segmentation. In my opinion, segmentation is a very strategic initiative. So, for example, in healthcare, payer industry, insurance business, finance looks at things in terms of reserves, in terms of the medical loss ratio. That's how they look at the risk. How much do I have to put on reserve to be able to pay the claims for all these new members are coming on board. So when you're building a segmentation, that should be a metric that you provide them on the back end at a segment level so that they can understand what do they need to plan for. On the call center customer service side, they have you integrate that information because it helps you know, does this segment tend to ask questions related to benefits, related to, do they need more understanding about the plan they have? Is it more grievances? And the grievances is a big thing in healthcare you want to try and reduce. So it's important to have the segmentation, have everybody in your enterprise understand how they're going to leverage that, because that's how you can bring everybody together. Now that causes challenges because the data that a customer call center uses is its own system, own technology. They use it to operate their call center. Sometimes things are comments, not data, like structured data. But there are now, the good thing is there's technology that can help translate that. So that's a good thing. Another challenge is if you think about claims or data warehouses, why they were built in the healthcare system, it's for education. I wrote it down because I keep education of claims. So basically, it's a 3-year type of systems that they look at to make sure that the claims were paid right, that there were no problems with it. So history is not always maintained. There are different systems, like one maybe has 3 years, another one has 10 years back, and that's all you get. There isn't that loyalty concept yet that's used regularly in a healthcare insurance industry, not like in banking or retail or so on. So sometimes they don't have a data element, which I was surprised of, like the first time you had that relationship with that member. They may have gone somewhere else and came back. You've got all that data about them when they were with you. That's not always connected. So it's a lot of, those are the types of challenges. It's really thinking at a higher level, at a member journey and all the touch points, and how can I sew that together, and how can I maybe sometimes have to piece it one piece at a time until I can build that data hub, or something that takes, by the way, 3 to 5 years of investment. And in marketing, you need to have to generate return on your investment very quickly. So those are some of the challenges And that's why I think segmentation needs to be at an enterprise level just to get everybody on the same page.
Right. And speaking to that, so pulling a thread from our prior panel, the question had become, how do you do that? Do you build the internal capability, or do you go out and outsource it and bring it in? We're in the process of bringing in a digital-first agency who can help us stand up that infrastructure, get our data nice and clean, and so we start with a strong baseline and a strong software application on top of it, so we can manage it going forward, and then help us understand, to your point, where our core segments are, where our core competencies are in terms of clinical pathways, whether it be cardiology or oncology. Where do we have competitive advantage that we can then leverage against that newly developed database? But we have a strong team, but we don't have the digital expertise to go and do that on our own. So we've acquired it, and one of our mandates in the RFP was help us get to that place where we can manage the data on our own. Help us pull us up the learning curve quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in a lot of RFPs that have come our way, right? It's like, how do you get us started today and then train us and build systems for us that we can assume that, management of those things. We're talking about institutional silos and managing institutional silos. Are there any practical strategies that you guys have identified for breaking down some of those silos and identifying and sort of finding that data that lives in the organization somewhere and then actually getting access to it? Because certainly it's been a challenge for us over the years. When you start asking around, nobody knows where it is. Nobody knows who really owns it. Nobody's even sure if you're allowed to have access to it. So do you guys have any input on that?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the areas where it benefits to be working with an agency. And I'm not trying to plug agencies, but often we are in a position where we see multiple approaches to data management and the use of data. So we have the ability to go into a client and say, this is how it should be done, and this is what we need. Help us find that data within your organization. So if it is a situation where you're at the client, it is siloed, you don't know who has it, there's often people that, hopefully you're not in that situation, but there are partners out there that can help guide the conversation, help you understand what good looks like, and help you find exactly what is needed and where it lives. And oftentimes we'll also come with that data, that insight that says when you do this, it equals this, and show actual results. And being able to do that and showing this can bring ROI is a big factor in getting the higher ups to buy in, right? They're not just going to give you the data if it's not going to lead to results.
And frankly, that's kind of why I am where I am. I was hired from outside of the healthcare industry. Our executive management knew that they didn't know what they didn't know. So they wanted somebody who had had some experience in setting up that customer journey and understanding it, both from a customer experience and marketing perspective as well as a data perspective. So, when I walked through the door, I created a deck which I shared with some of my peers and said, this is what good could look like from a customer experience perspective for our patients. And then this is how you amortize your initial investment in marketing and you cascade it through that relationship with that customer over time. And thankfully, our senior leaders, in IT and customer experience and other places, they get it, and they were actually anxious for somebody to come in and help them stitch all those disparate pieces together. And so I've been fortunate in that I've walked into kind of that scenario, and we have executive management who are quite innovative in how they approach things, and they've looked for those skill sets and invested in them and brought them in. But yeah, I mean, it's really creating that picture of the future and laying out the tactical points to fill in those gaps. It's paint by numbers.
So I actually do think you were trying to plug CMI, but we've actually done quite a bit of work with Justin's team and had to rely on an agency, especially from a non-personal promotion standpoint with healthcare professionals, and using our call plan to, take it a step further in terms of how we segment those physicians, understanding what their prescribing behavior is like, but also understanding how do they like to receive communication, whether it's through print journals, whether it's through digital, and tying that media consumption behavior to their prescribing habits. And that kind of lays the groundwork for how we structure our media plans, how we allocate our budgets, what actual content do we need to produce, and what channels we need to participate in. So, you know, when there is a lack of a sort of an internal team to help with things like this, you know, we really rely on our agencies. I'd also like to, you know, pay attention to the fact that we rely a lot on advanced analytics partners like Crossix and IQVIA to also help to fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, we don't have the pleasure of working with CMI on every brand that I happen to work on. So in cases like that, we, you know, we'll hand our lists over to another third party to help us with that segmentation. Obviously, de-identify and blinded, but they're able to usually turn that back to us to help us make informed decisions about our media plans and how we go to market.
Excellent. Yeah, so can you guys speak to some of the privacy concerns and regulatory concerns that are emerging or that you're seeing as we bring this data together and leverage it in our marketing campaigns?
So when I was at the healthcare insurance company, I became very good friends with the chief security officer because I seemed to be triggering all kinds of problems for him and getting different emails saying I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't get this external data and so on. But it's just, one is really understanding the space and helping the, you know, there are reasons why these HIPAA laws are in place and these privacy laws are in place. There are, for me and the work I do, I don't need the name of the patient. I just need to understand their behavior and their activities and so on. And there are companies, third-party providers, external data providers who have put systems in place and who are HIPAA compliant that can provide you, again, that external information that you need, and they don't return the PII. And so there are ways to get the type of information that you have, but again, you have to be cognizant of how you're using the data, when can you use it, and having that, again, close relationship with the security officers just to know what's possible, what's not. Like an example is a technique now is web scraping, so trying to understand competitive engagement on the internet, and we had to explain how we're using it and, you know, trying to stay away from being legally viable for some things. So, yeah.
Can you just explain what you mean by web scraping?
So it's basically, it's an analytic tool and technology that helps you track certain words on the internet that you write, an algorithm that you write to understand and download some words and analyze it on the back end. So it's like scraping the web for information. And there are, right now, there's, again, there are some regulations about that too, but it's a new technology.
So I was going to say, I think an easy way to explain web scraping, if you guys are all familiar with Google, essentially Google has these things called web crawlers. They go out and crawl every single page in the world, and they index, they look for certain things, and they say this is what this page is about. And then when you go and you search for, Nike tennis shoes, it brings you back results based on what it found from those web scrapers. And they can be used in a lot of different ways. Competitive tools we all use on a daily basis for our media efforts all use different variances of web scraping tools, and it sounds like you're doing some pretty cool stuff with those as well.
Yeah, and it actually triggered at the insurance company I worked for, it triggered our security team to be making sure that we're protecting our own website. So the fact that we were able to do that triggered them to look at their privacy statement and take care of protection too. So, sometimes good things happen from trying different things. So.
I think recently what we've seen with Facebook and GDPR, I think we all probably went through some trying times earlier this year, one Facebook scandal after the next, but it really forced us to take a hard look at what our cookie policies were, what our privacy notices were on our websites, and making sure that we were being very transparent about data and information that we were collecting from customers visiting our website. So I'd say that, you know, what we did is consulted with our chief privacy officer to ensure that we had all the right language and that we were truly covered based on all of the you know, data collecting and retargeting efforts that we were doing. I also think, you know, consulting with your regulatory and legal partners early and often, I know for some folks, you know, that can be challenging, but I do think that having them have a seat at the table and understanding what it is that you're seeking to do can be beneficial in the long run. You know, in case that you do run into hurdles, I think having them bought into what you're trying to do is definitely helpful.
From the provider perspective, for us, it's less about getting specific pieces of data, but it's more about understanding the condition and not speaking specifically to the condition, but providing additional value to an individual, let's say, who's facing a cardiac issue. Let's say they've come to us in the past for content. We want to continue their relationship, continue providing them value, but we don't want to speak to any specific issue that they may have or somehow leverage their EMR data into our search activity. We want to keep a firewall between those two elements. We also want to avoid, you know, what's commonly referred to as the creepiness factor. So we want to make sure that we're providing value into the specific area that's relevant for them, but we don't want to speak specifically to, you know, their issue that they presented with, but still remain relevant.
Panel, I'm sorry, we have to leave some time for questions. We have some questions from the audience, starting with Andrew.
Thank you so much. It's great. Andrew Eklund, I'm with Cicerone. You'll hear from me later, so I'll leave it at that. I'm curious what you are doing with your first-party data. How many of you are standing up your own DMP for media purposes, or if you're using anything like Domo, which can pull in data from all over the place and hopefully synthesize it, or is it a mess like most people?
I can say from the agency side, we have our own DMP set up on the HCP side and are building that out for the DTC side as well, building out an entire database of over 260 million consumer profiles. We found that, I think one of the issues we have is there's a lot of data out there on individuals, but it doesn't necessarily tie to healthcare. And that's one of the biggest missing gaps in data available for us from a targeting perspective, where we've actually had to go out and say, we need to build this ourselves. So we're doing that actually right now, and hopefully going to be launching something pretty cool down the pipeline.
From the provider perspective, no. That's phase 2 or phase 3. So the first perspective is I outlined before is to stand up a robust data set of our own consumers, you know, and people like them, and then be able to pull in Tableau or Domo or something like that and be able to help us analyze and get more efficient going forward. But no, right now for us it's creating the structure, creating the robust data gathering and cleansing activities that we need to be able to go forward and do that more succinctly.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that from a farmer perspective, I would say that we're very much in a similar place. We do have a DMP internally. It's not being used. And so right now we're really focused on consistent capture of data and data cleansing, and then also promoting awareness within the organization that a DMP does exist, and then figuring how we can actually tap into it and use it for our media targeting purposes.
We have another one over here.
Rhonda Meyer from True Media. I'm wondering if anybody has firsthand experience working with third-party data after GDPR across overseas, and in Europe or any of those.
U.S.-based only.
U.S. only.
Okay.
Nope.
Same here.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is Yi Hui. I'm from PulsePoint. We're a programmatic health technology platform. Question, I guess, for all of you about building a DMP and what you guys use it for. How do you I guess, thread the fine line between understanding the 260 million consumer profiles that you build on, and what do you use it for? Are we allowed to use that for targeting in any kind of media activation? And if so, what are the do's and don'ts?
That is an extremely loaded question that we probably could do our own panel on. Look, obviously, separation of church and state is, I think, a big part of it. So the people that are executing any type of the media, so our media strategists, our media planners, any of that, they never know who they are targeting. They get an ID, right? And that may never even touch their email. Everything is done through a third party between company, third party, and then people that are actually, taking a patient segment and uploading it into the back of a DSP and targeting, or into the back end of Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So there's a lot of fine lines and firewalls in place, so there are no HIPAA compliant issues. I know we're kind of at the end. I'd love to talk to you more about it because there's a ton of specific things in place to prevent any issues from and do's and don'ts.
We have time for one last question.
Is this on? Okay.
Yep.
Hi, Zara Castor with Experian. This question is actually for Justin. So you talked about, building all these profiles and segments, and there's that drop-off when it comes to activation. Could you elaborate, why that's so? Is that an internal issue? Is that because the process is so manual with your vendors?
That's a really good question. So I would say this actually comes from experience from a client we took over a couple years ago. There was some great, big, beautiful insights into, hey, this person was activated by our TV ad, and they went and saw a doctor, and they didn't get our drug. We want to target them. You can't target somebody that, they called it a specific name, I forget what it was, but we can't target that individual because there's nothing internally tracking that John Smith didn't get prescribed that drug. And that was a big part of where these individuals, or where this company wanted to invest money, was in this subset, so they could get these people to go back in the doctor and say, no, I really want this. So that was kind of an aha moment a couple years ago of saying, we need to start, our patient segmentation needs to take media consumption behavior into account. And instead of just these attitudinal segments. So it's Experian. You guys, we can talk later, but do it. This is probably a little bit before when it actually comes up into breaking out and what we're breaking those individual segments out into and what's the kind of attitudinal reasons behind the breakout.
Hans and panel, thank you very much for drilling deep on this one. I never know where data panels are going to go, but you guys made it work. Thank you so much.